Hi. Hi. Do you like certificates? No. Good, guys. Well, that's what I'm going to talk about. It's all of us get in touch earlier or later. Some of us love them, many don't. But certificates are great. You just have to take some time to understand them, to get used to them, and especially to understand how Puppet handles them. Very short self-introduction. Italian, native German speaker. I'm from South Tyrol, so that's the small region in the Alps where we don't speak real German, we don't speak real Italian. My English is also not so good, but somehow I finished here. I did a lot of things in the past, and since 3 years I'm just traveling around and doing trainings and consulting for NETWAYS, developing from time to time, and yeah, that's it. I think I do not have to explain you what NETWAYS is or is doing. NETWAYS, related to Puppet, we're doing lots of trainings, and we are proud to do the Puppet Camp here, and we're also doing a lot of Puppet consulting. That's what I had to do till yesterday evening, so unfortunately I haven't been here. And yeah, that's it. So this year, Puppet Labs split up the trainings. We did Puppet Master training still last year, and right now we have a more basic and more intense fundamentals training, and the Puppet Advanced training, and pretty interesting also the extending Puppet with Ruby training. And on the last talks, I always had the next dates on the slides, but we're doing so many of them right now, so please have a look at the webpage. There is everything you need to know. Right now we're going to talk about certificates. I'll not go very deep into details, just make some refresher. And then I'll pick up many different things from Puppet itself, how it handles certificates, where they're stored, what you can do and where you can mess around, or what you could do wrong, or what you should and shouldn't do. And I'll talk a little bit about distributed environments, and of course of the role of my certification authority in such setups. And as an example, I took a security bug we had in the past, but it's a great example to show how certificates are handled and how certificate lifecycle can a little bit hard to manage with Puppet right now. And yeah, that leads us to the last point we're talking about. So we have public key infrastructure in Puppet itself. So this just means that we have public keys and we have private keys, and each member that's talking to the others has its very own private key, and it shouldn't share it. And if someone else has the public key for my private key, it can decrypt what I encrypted, or it can just check if something that has been signed by me is effectively coming from myself. We have different algorithms, RSA, DSA, and so on, and nothing special there. Lots of elliptic curve algorithms and so on. But that's not the topic today. I took a screenshot from Wikipedia. We have something like this and even more in Puppet 2. Let me explain you just a few rows. We have the most important things. I think here is the certification authority. That's the one that has and owns the private key and generates certificates. The guy here created its own private key and asks the request authority to sign that key, and this one decides whether or not we will do so. So in practice with Puppet, that's you. You are sitting in front of your console and say Puppet cert list, and you see there's someone waiting for a certificate, that someone has a certification signing request that has to be signed. So if you say Puppet cert sign, then what you're going to do is put a stamp on that certificate and say, dear certification authority, please sign this certificate. The signed certificate will then be handed over to the Puppet agent, and it is happy and can use the certificate to, talk to the master again. If the master gets a request with a certificate, with a client certificate, it has somehow to find out if this certificate is valid, is true. And what's great in such an environment is that we don't have a central knowledge. It's just enough to have the public key of our certificate to prove or to make sure that this certificate has been signed by the certification authority. So this validation authority is just the Puppet master itself having the public key of the certification authority, and it can make sure that, yes, this key has been signed by my certification authority, and that's it. Questions? Good. Did you all hear about X.509? It's a standard. It's from the ITUT. That's not the ITF, so they're the good and the bad guys. But this is a standard, and it's great. It defines a strict hierarchy. So if you have certificates, you could have something like a web of trust, but that's not what we have here. Here we have a tree. So in your browser, if you open an HTTPS site and have a look at the certification chain, then you might see that there are sitting multiple certification authorities, and there's just the third or the fourth one is the certificate of the websites. This is something we could use in Puppet 2, but it doesn't work right now. Yeah, and version 3 allows extension. That's also something we'll see right now. So, following that standard, a single certificate just has, well, its name, its own distinguished name. That's a single name identifying our certificate. A serial number, it knows what algorithm has been used to create this key and who issued the certificate, who signed it. It knows that it's valid from a specific date to another timestamp. That means it has an expiration date, and very important, it also has a start date. And it's pretty funny if you start your Puppet master and the first time you started it, it had the time in the future. So you'll finish with a certification authority, with a certificate that didn't start yet. So this will be very funny, something like that. So it's very important, but that's something all of you already heard many times. Time is very important if you are going to use Puppet with certificates. The distinguished name itself is just a string. It often is a DNS name. It is so for our agents, but it doesn't have to be. So you can write everything you want in there. And for example, for the Puppet certification authority itself, it isn't a DNS name. It's a little bit more. Yeah, and the names are something that you should care about. Also about the names in the certification authority, but we'll see that later. Another very important component is the certification or revocation list. If you do a Puppet cert clean or something like that, you automatically put certificates on that list, and then you're wondering if you once again copy the same certificate in place, something, it doesn't work anymore. Revoking a certificate means that this certificate will never again work for you. You could fiddle around with the revocation list and manually change it or dump it and re-import it and filtering out something, but this doesn't make fun. So usually this list grows over time, and if you have a distributed environment, it's very important that all masters get that list in some way, or maybe also the agents, just to make sure that if you revoke a certificate in one place, also the others have to know so in some way. We'll talk about the distributed setup later. Yeah, this of course is very important. If someone steals a private key from some host, or if you have a break-in on one server, then you should immediately revoke the certificate, because even if you reinstall the server, someone could have stolen that private key and could months later identify itself at that server and get the configuration from a Puppet master, maybe with some passwords in there. So if something isn't okay, if you if it might have happened that someone stole a key, then please revoke it. In Puppet, well, there are different extensions and formats we can store certificates. Puppet itself is just using 2 of them. There is .csr for certificate signing requests. All of them are stored base 64 encoded. So if you open the files, it's plain text, and you can send them as an email attachment or just in the mail. That's fine. They have different headers and footers. And, well, yeah, we have the signing request, we have the certificates itself, and also the private keys in Puppet are stored just as PEM files. So they are DR encoded as of the AES-N1 notation and so on, but these are details you can study if you want to, but it's not something we want to hear in the talk. Okay, so we already talked a little bit about Puppet. If I already have my Puppet master running and just want to find out what happens if I create a completely new Puppet certification authority, I could also tell Puppet to use a specific SSL directory, invent a name for the master, and let it run once. So that's what I tried out before. Just create a directory, run the master one time, and here you see that if you start Puppet the first time, it creates a new SSL key for the certification authority, creates a new request for that authority, it knows its fingerprint, and then it's signing the certification authority's certification request with its own certificate, so it's trusting himself. The inventory file is something we're going to talk about, and it's going to create a new empty revocation list. It then creates a new key for its own hostname, so the certification authority isn't the same as the certificate for its own name. These are 2 different things. And, well, once again, creating the request, the fingerprint, and it signs its own certificate and removes the file from the directory containing the request itself. Everything that happens here can also be done through the REST API. So that's, if you like to code and want to talk to the REST API, then you really can, from remote, create certificates, revoke them, make completely new ones, and make the master sign them without even being on the console of the master. So that worked fine. And, well, this screenshot here shows more or less the same. And if we have a look at the directory here, see, yeah, this in the history. This is what has been created on the master. We have, yeah, first of all, the certification authority with its own key. It has the revocation list. It has a public key and created its own certificate. It has a password for the private key, and very important, I do not know if this has always been there or been added later to Puppet, but here you have an inventory of all certificates you signed. It's just a plain text file with fingerprints, if I'm not wrong, and host names. And if one day you have to find out what certificates you have generated over time, then this is the right place to look for this information. If an agent asks for a new, or asks the master to sign a certificate, it will sit in the certificate request directory. And as soon as you, well, click in some front-end dashboard on sign or do Puppet search sign, then what happens is the certificate will be generated, and after that it removes the request from that directory. That's what happened here, and therefore we no longer see the request. But it will remain on the agent. Then, what else? Yeah, and of course, right now it just has one key, so it has private and public keys, created one key for its own host name, and here's also the public key, and that's it. Same thing for the agent. I'll not try it out. We see everything here. I just run the agent with --test. So this means do not demonize, enable verbose, and run just once. And I take a random certificate, a random name, and here you see, well, it creates a new request and has a fingerprint, and then it says, well, it has no certificates and no one signed its request, so it will stop here. You could also add --wait for cert and give him a timeout. So if you want to script something like this on master and agent in parallel, then you could tell him, well, wait for some seconds, and with the script or the same script on the master, you're going to sign it and then switch back to the SSH session to the agent and go on. Something like that could be done. That's it. We have no certification authority folder here, but we have the public key of the certificate. That's very important because we do not only authenticate clients or agents, but also the agents have to make sure that the master is the one that he states to be. Otherwise, everybody could say, well, I'm the master, do a man-in-the-middle attack. So we need to have this in both directions. That's very important. The basic commands, that's something I think all of you know. Puppet cert list shows me all awaiting certification requests. If I add --all, I could also specify a single hostname if I want to. Then I see all certificates, also those I already signed, and in front of the name of the certificate you would see a plus if it has been signed, nothing if it's still waiting to be signed, a minus if you revoked it, and other charts if something strange is going on, if they expired or something even more strange. Well, then of course you can sign a certification request, you can revoke a certificate at every time. Pay attention, clean not only deletes the certificate, but also puts this certificate on the revocation list. So if you just want to remove a file from the master and maybe later use it, then you shouldn't clean it, but manually delete it. And there is so clean always revokes it. The REST API also offers the delete command, but on the command line with Puppet cert, I just can either clean or revoke, and if you want just to delete it, then you have to do it manually. Yeah. As we created some certificates here, so let's have a look at one of them. OpenSSL is a great tool for doing so. I'm working with X.509 certificates, so that's the subcommand I'm using. Then as an input file, I'm going to use, let's use a certificate. And I say I do not want to have an output file and want to output it in text format. And there's a lot of data. If you write just Puppet cert print and the host name, you get exactly the same output. Here we see, well, serial number, we see an issuer, and you can see that this is not just a host name. The certification authority is called Puppet CA, and the host name itself. So the distinguished name of the certificate of the certification authority is not a host name and different from the certificate of the master itself. This is very important, especially if later we're going to talk about how to renew those certificates or not. We see when it started to be valid, and we see that it expires in 2018. So the default lifetime of certificates in Puppet is 5 years, and as Puppet is not so young, we already have a lot of people that expired the certificates, and this really makes fun. Yeah, the certificate itself has as a distinguished name just its domain name, that's example.com. And what else? Yeah, we have some extensions here. And this one hasn't, but very interesting, no, it has. We have as alternative names Puppet, Puppet in NETWAYS, test example, and so on. And this is great because this is the master and it should have an alias with just Puppet and a domain name. This means that if this is very important because the agent talks to the server, that's usually Puppet or the server setting you put in the Puppet conf, but this domain name has to be in the certificate. So if the master itself has a certificate just for its name and Puppet and has a DNS alias saying that it's called Puppet Master and you configure the agents to talk to Puppet Master, you will fail. It will not work. The agent expects the master to carry Puppet Master in that example in its name. And here we don't have a Puppet Master, so it will definitively fail. So it's important at the beginning, if you create a certificate for your master, to already know which names are you going to use, especially in large or distributed setups, to talk to your master. And, well, that's the most important part. We see that we have RSA encryption and so on. Do you know where your certificates are on your hard disks for your master and your agents? Yeah, we have or etc Puppet SSL or etc Puppet Labs Puppet SSL, or we have var lib SSL, var lib Puppet SSL, or we have var lib Puppet SSL /dot Puppet /SSL. You really should configure it. Do not trust your system to do the right thing. Do not trust Puppet itself to do the right thing on an upgrade. Please configure in your Puppet conf your SSL dir, or at least the conf dir, even if it sounds strange to configure the conf dir in a config file, just do so. A Puppet is usually, the agent is running as root, the master is running as a Puppet or the Puppet user, and this already could create conflicts if they are using or sharing the same SSL directory, so you should use different ones for both in that case. And it's very funny if you start your Puppet master with passenger and it works once you have did Puppet master -- no demonize in the foreground, and it stops working with the passenger as the config RU or something internally in Puppet is doing something strange and says, well, I'm not root, and if I'm not root, but the user Puppet or not DTC. There's a lot of strange voodoo going on to find out where it has its config and SSL directories, and they changed it over time many times. So don't trust it, configure it. That's what I want to say with this slide. And if you're not sure, Puppet master or agent -- config print SSL dir, then it will show you what it's going to use. But you will not see the voodoo, for example, happening in the passenger if you write this in command line. It may be different there. Just a few words to the REST API. Well, Puppet itself is just a web application, nothing else. And here's an example config file for passenger, and of course, these variables don't exist in the config file. It is using the certificate files, and of course, it has to have the permissions to read those. So if you create them with root, you will have problems with Apache. And the web application offers just a REST API. You have the port 8140 on the master, and you have had the 8139 on the agent with listen true, but that's deprecated right now. And the URLs are just usually looking, you have the master /environment, some resource you're interested in, and the key is mostly the host name. So what happens internally is that you can say, I want to have, for the production environment, the catalog for a specific node name, and that's it. And Puppet itself doesn't check the IP address or reverse host name of the agent that's connecting to the master. It doesn't care. The only thing it's interested in is the name it sees in the SSL communication is a certificate. And this is why you have to configure 2 additional things in the Puppet conf if you want to use Passenger, because you have to pass this through from Apache to Puppet. And together with the outconf file, where you are, for example, saying that one specific node is allowed to post just its very own report. This is what that file looks like. If it's new to you, just please have a look at it, and especially check, for example, this setting was in the past we had default settings where it didn't check the node name itself here, so everybody could post reports for the hosts. But this is one example showing why it is so important to have those certificates and to have them in a way that they really work and that no one can say I'm someone else. Everything clear here? It's just a regular expression, and I'm storing everything after report in the first variable, $1, and then I'm saying I'm just allowing $1 itself to store it. So with that ACL, I'm allowing each host to store just its very own report. And we have a lot of such rules in the outconf file. And if you want to play around with the API, it's very important to use the certificates too. You could use curl or some other tool, PHP, Java, whatever. All you have to do is just use those URLs, tell your HTTP library to use those certificates, and put accept YAML or Python in the header, and then you can play Puppet agent. Yeah, that was just an example. It's showing that just removing SSL is not a solution, because as soon as you do so, you have no chance to identify your hosts. And this is the only way that you can make sure that that host is really the one it proves, or it wants to prove to be. Distributed setups. This is a screenshot we have in the Puppet Advanced training. This is what the standard classroom setup looks like there. It's pretty interesting. We usually have masters and 1 or more agents on each student PC, and we have 1 classroom master. And the funny thing is, just at the beginning, we are going to tell each student to configure its master in a way to not be a certification authority, and we tell all the agents to use that master as a certification authority and do all the signing voodoo centrally. But this is great. Something like this is great if you want to have a distributed setup or have failover or just have 2 Puppet masters to be on the safe side. Then, well, it's easy. It's a web application. It's easy to distribute it with a load balancer, but it's not so good if you assign some certificates on one side and some certificates on the other side. So it's usually a good practice to have just 1 server, or just 1 of them, that is doing, well, is acting as a certification authority. And all the others need is just your public certificate, and that's it. Configuration is something like this. I am saying to the master that it doesn't have to act as a certification authority, and the agent is told that the CA server is just 1 specific of those masters, 1 specific server. Then you could go farther, and what we are doing in the advanced training is setting up a load balancer here called proxy. We add the proxy alias to all certificates or master certificates, and then we're randomly distributing the request to all masters, and everything still has to work. That's pretty funny. 2 weeks ago, I've been asked, well, we know that we have hierarchies and certificates, and that's great and works fine for websites, because a change root certificate is much cheaper than a real one. And why do we have to have 1 certification authority? Why not just sign all the masters and allow them to change the certificates? And well, this is great, and over time it worked in some Puppet versions, and maybe it will still work. I don't know. But it never has been implemented, and if it works, it's just luck. So don't use it. There is a ticket for this, and it would be very interesting to have it. It's not so important, but yeah, it's a nice feature. So right now, if you know a lot about certificates and want to have something like chain certificates, don't use them in Puppet right now. Oh yeah, and security. Puppet Labs is doing a great job when it goes to security problems. Every software has such, and they are fixing them very fast, and they make them public and describe them, and they are immediately available also in the open source version. So this is how it should be. And it's very interesting just to have a look at those, at the old ones, to see what happened in the past, and that way you get a feeling what you maybe should take care of. And a very interesting one is one that had to do with, well, certificates. In all versions up to 2.7.6, we had the problem that if in the master you had a setting called cert DNS names, and this is what you are, for example, doing or have been doing in such a distributed setup, then it added the Puppet and Puppet.yourdomain alias in the certificate for every agent. This means that if one of your agents wanted to play man in the middle, it was allowed to present himself as Puppet. I just picked up this example. It leads us to the next topic. Because the only chance you have to do if you had something like this, well, first fix the problem, and then you have to throw away all certificates. So you have to throw away your certification authority. It's absolutely useless. It doesn't have to just upgrade. All of your agents have certificates that have been signed, and they are valid for Puppet. So even if you are not affected and have a new version, maybe just have a look at your certificates. This is an example with OpenSSL itself, or the ticket for this issue has a link to a remediation kit, and it's very interesting to just study the PDFs in there and to have a look at the tools and how Puppet did a very good job to solve this and to help you to clean up your environment if you had this problem. You really should do so. It's very interesting. And just to be on the safe side, maybe try out, have a look at your certificates, and if your agents have Puppet as an alias, then you really have a problem. Yes, that's what we already talked to. An upgrade here is not enough. You have to throw away your certification authority, and this leads us to the next topic, because you have to do more or less the same thing if your certification authority expires, because as we heard before, you just have 5 years. And, well, you either leave the company after 3 years and everything is fine, or you have to, in some ways, think about certification or certificate lifecycle management. Bad news is there is nothing like this in Puppet, and there are a lot of tickets, and the best one is 7272. There it summarizes everything and links a lot of interesting tickets and says, well, Puppet should automatically allow re-signing of your certificates. That would be great. If I signed a certificate and it's today still valid, but I see that it will expire in 2 weeks, just create a new one. But something like this doesn't exist right now, and this means we have a lot of work. Unfortunately here, the last comment on the ticket is that it will be available with Puppet Sites, and Puppet Sites is an interesting, strange thing. I'm not sure about if it is great or not, but it sounds great, but I haven't heard about it for a lot of time, so it's not so good if you seen a ticket that it depends on something that doesn't go on or seems to do not go on. But 2 weeks ago, I've seen that this and another SSL ticket have been tagged with customer, so I don't know what it means, but let's hope that something happens. Well, right now, you're on your own. What you, in theory, have to do is, the agent cannot recreate a certificate, and it doesn't. It only does so if you delete the old one. And if the certification authority itself expired, you have to throw it away, because all certificates you signed with that certification authority are expired too. So you could stop all your agents, then remove all certificates on the master and on the agents, create a new certification authority, and it makes sense to give him a new name. So what you could do is to, as a name, write just Puppet CA cert name, that's the default, and maybe add a timestamp. Also add the DNS alternative names. That's the new name of the setting since the security bug we mentioned before. And depending on the version, it may happen that it says, well, you have alt name, so I'll not sign it even with generate, and you have to Puppet cert -- allow DNS alt name, sign, and the name. Yeah, but if this is required, it will give you a red message showing you that you have to do so. Yeah, unfortunately, this has to be done by hand. So if you don't want to do it manually, do it the Puppet way. Have a look at the remediation kit that's linked in the security issue mentioned before. It's great. It's a lot of things to read, but it's very interesting. So just have a look at it. It's very. Sometimes it makes sense to sit down and study a few things. You could write your own SSH loop and do what you have seen on the page before. Just stop all agents, remove the directories, clean up the master, create a new certification authority, and start up all of them and sign them. You could maybe create something based on Marionette Collective. I don't know if something like this already exists. Would also work fine. And you could also hope that Puppet just fixes this before your certificates expire. Of course, if you don't want to care about this, it would be great. This works. You can say the default lifetime will be 20 years, or just set a fixed name as a Unix timestamp. It should work to the master config, and then for 20 years you will hear nothing, and you should leave the company before. And do not try 100 years or something like this, because if you run into the 32-bit problems with your date, then it might work with Puppet, but you could have trouble with other tools, so don't do so. 20 years is fine. That's it for now. Thank you very much. And if you have questions, you're welcome.
Any questions?
Everybody ready for lunch?
If you want to have a redundant certificate authority, and at some point one also wants to eliminate all single points of failure. And if you have CA as single point of failure, you do not want it. Are there ways?
Yes. So the question was, if I have a distributed setup and have just one certification authority, then this is a single point of failure. Because all you have to do is just sync the file somewhere. Running it twice on two hosts is not so good because of caches, and I wouldn't use a shared disk for two certification authorities, but you could have another one as a standby, or just switch the domain name to the other one and switch the disk to the other server, or have it on a shared device, doesn't matter. But I would use just one certification authority at a time and then make it fail over. Other questions? Yeah?
Is it possible to reissue the Puppet certificate with alternative names, with new alternative names, so that all client certificates do not have to be recreated?
Yes. Yes. You can. The question was if you can reissue the certificate for the master with new alternative names. You can. This. No
problem.
Really? Okay. Thank you. No, really. That's what I.
I'd have to use OpenSSL then, because Puppet CA does not have.
No, it allows you. With Puppet Cert you can. Just create it manually. You could, for example, you don't have to go through the cert to generate the certificates, ask the master to sign it, and then use Puppet Cert sign. You also could just say Puppet Cert generate, and you can do everything or most of the things you can do with OpenSSL, you can do with Puppet generate. You can use -- DNS alt names and add other names and create it once again. So, for example, what we are doing in a distributed setup, we have 5 servers and all of them have different names. So if I talk directly to them, they present themselves with their own name, but they also have an alternative name with the name of the load balancer, and this works fine.
I guess the simplest solution for getting new DNS alt names into master certificate is just stop the master server, whack the old certificates, enter DNS alt names in your config and start it up again, and it creates and signs by the internal CA, so that's no problem at all, really.
Correct. All settings you can pass on command line, you can use in a config file too. So DNS names, the old one, or DNS alt names can be used in the config. So if there are no questions, enjoy your meal. Mahlzeit.
Thank you, Tom.
And thank you very much.